No one needs telling that time is the handservant of death, that the sniff of insurrection is in the air. Death itself is perhaps doomed to fall victim to time. We have secured the following interview with one of a small but highly organized advance guard. He is 278 years old, and he wishes to remain anonymous. Sir, why do you insult the average lifespan with your longevity?
I have discovered the secret of time.
What is the secret of time?
But there is no time for time. Time is a false alarm.
How did you smash your biological clock?
I stopped it from running.
It is said they smashed all the clocks during the Paris Commune. Do you remember that?
Sure. It was my idea. Courbet was in on it too.
Wasn't that perhaps a mistake? Weren't they, in Fraser's terminology, Fraser the Golden Bough, weren't they mistaking an ideal connection for a real one?
I'd rather have an ideal connection than a real one at any time.
Then you would say the ideal should be timelessness.
The ideal is timelessness. Life's too long for time. Time's too short for life.
How do you attain this state of timelessness?
Tell yourself this every day. Every day, in every way, I become less and less timeful. If you do it every day, it has a diurnal and cosmic effect, and it'll make you feel 24 hours younger. When I was born 278 years ago, I was something of a prodigy. I knew where I'd come from. I could see up the nozzle of my father's cock for 7 generations. And I knew where I was going. The pearly gates, what are they? A memory of the vaginal orifice? I knew how to regress and evolve at the same time.
That sounds like meta-gibberish.
You make me feel 120 when you say things like that.
But if there's no time, then there's no beginning and no end. Don't you find that horrifying?
As you look out of your eyes now, you have only about 160 degrees of vision. That's why you see beginnings and ends. I have 360 degrees.
So you're saying that time is simply my lack of perception. Then why do things stop and start?
They don't.
You mean everything is moving?
Yes. I can hear it. Can't you?
Okay. Who do you think invented death?
It's an exploitation device invented by some earthbound spiv to keep you coming and to keep you going. It fucks up your biorhythms. It's the final rubber stamp. It certifies that you have been totally exploited. They also plant a carved rock on top of your chest to indicate that there's no point in anyone else trying to exploit you. Death comes like a thief in the night. Don't let yourself get mugged.
What is the secret of immortality?
It's a secret, but it's only a secret from those who don't know. You see, we are microcosmic. We have everything inside us, and we always will. We have God, and we have God's Son. God's Son descends from us, falls down from what comes into us. Does that give you a clue?
No.
Think of Jesus, who was spat on and reviled. What distillation of us is spat on and reviled?
Crap.
Exactly. Within your own excrement is the secret of immortality.
Could you be a bit more specific?
The substance is called indole.
Aha. Aleister Crowley ate his own excrement, and he's, well, dead.
Crude attempts. He didn't sublimate it. He just let it hang.
Will you tell us how to prepare it?
Sure.
Are there no conditions? Do you want everyone to have this formula for immortality?
Sure.
Even Donald Trump, for example?
Would he want it? Death is for the deadly.
All right. Immortality in a turd. Lay it on the line.
Soak a turd in petroleum ether and add water. The soluble excrement will separate, and you can obtain the sublimated shit which contains indole, packaged chemically in dimethyltryptamine and diethyltryptamine, two powerful psychedelics. Immortality is a trip.
Oh, come on.
It's just one method. How to live forever with no expensive props.
But what's the point of infinity if there's nothing that's finite?
I can see that it might give infinity a bit of local colour. But Ishtakaidish die einzige Arbeit. Isness is my business. Meister Eckhart.
He told you that?
In his way, he was German at the time.
But if there's simply a continuous present, what is the reason for the concept of time?
It's a bureaucratic and scurrilous attempt to chart pain. There's no time for time. I told you. Big Ben is Big Brother's brother. Ticks are ticks that bite your brain. Everything happens an infinite number of times as well as not happening at all. Imagine a giant flywheel. Everything spinning. Everything repeating. Now, as well as this perfect repetition, there's also the vibration of the machine. That's what you mortalists perceive. And that's what you are. What you mortalists think is real is nothing more than a slight and irrelevant imperfection in the cycle of infinite recurrence, valve trouble caused by your presence.
So reality and time are just a fault in some timelessness machine? That sounds like nonsense.
Time is nonsense. Your consensus reality is nonsense, and they both lead to death. Time, as you mortalists would have it, is merely an accumulation of your faulty perceptions of timelessness. Everything you measure is altered by the act of measuring it. Heisenberg probably rules, okay? Serial time, linear time, cumulative time, none of them get behind it and they all dim your mind's eye. Don't let Father Time kick sand in your face.
You mean we're blinded by time?
Yes, and death is your whole body gone blind. It's your perverted awareness of time which incites death, which is merely a bad habit, a suffocating accumulation of bad habits. It's an incident that has happened so often that people have come to accept it. But there is no accidental death. Accidents are incidents with an axe to grind. There is no accidental death, whatever the circumstance. Death is always suicide. Lose your sense of time. Gain a sense of timing.
So death is no more than a fashion.
It's a weak dogma kept up for the sake of appearances. I saw Albert Camus shortly before he allowed himself to be killed in a car accident. And he said that the relationship between the murderer and his victim is the only true relationship. How decadent can you get?
But surely the victim doesn't choose to be murdered.
With the exception of myself and a few more of my ilk still circulating, every human being ever born on this planet has been murdered, consented to be murdered, and spent their entire lives preparing for that pointless little spurt so beloved by footling existentialists. It's time for life and death to get divorced, Maybug. At the moment, you're just an unwanted bastard from the life-death marriage. Join up now, baby. There may not be a later.
You ever imagine yourself dying?
Do you ever imagine yourself being shat on by a pterodactyl? No, I don't. Not unless I goof like old Tom Parr.
The old man who's buried in Westminster Abbey.
He's locked up there. He lived from what? From 1483 to 1635. He lived on ale and sour cream.
How did he die?
He was invited to a celebration feast given by the king to celebrate his 152nd birthday. They fed him lark's tongues, pig's trotters in aspic, all the 17th century delicacies, 12 courses, all of them meat. Poor old Tom was too polite to refuse. A lifelong vegetarian. All that meat completely butchered his system, and he popped his clogs the next day.
I take it from that you're a vegetarian.
I eat meat if it meets me. Just carrion. I take what nature gives me. I don't rip it off. Maybe that's why Adam and Eve blew it suddenly occurs to me. They took the fruit off the tree before the tree was ready to give it them. Perhaps we should decapitate all florists. Butcher butchers! The animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, they're the fourth world. You've been expending a lot of energy in the third world, probably because you can vaguely understand its starving death rattle. But the fourth world has no pushy philosophers, no politicians. Nevertheless, they can fly higher, run faster, make more useful produce, communicate more quietly and more successfully than the colonial masters, and waste fewer natural resources. The meek will inherit the earth. What do you think that means? The fourth world have given up striking back with lions and tigers. They're all in jail, all in zoos or circuses. They've got a strike force now of an almost infinite number of almost invisible gorillas. More people die from insect-produced diseases than from any other cause. You should make peace soon. Otherwise, you're going to have to accept some very punitive terms.
We don't die simply because we're ripping off the fourth world, as you call it.
It's a contributory factor. Here's another fourth world lesson. You know how lizards lose a leg, lose a tail, and then it grows again? Well, why haven't we got that facility?
You mean even you don't?
Oh, I'm working on it. I have a few clues. But the reason most of us don't have it is that we're somatically involutionary. The reason we don't have it is that it would put all the warmongers and doctors out of business. The reason we don't have it is that we asked not to have it. DNA, which is evolution's little CIA agent, whispered to the powers that be that people really want to hurt each other. They really want to maim each other. They really want to paralyze each other. So they cloned it out of us, this facility, and left us as amputees. They did what the human race asked them.
So if we ask for immortality long enough, we'll get it.
Naturally. DNA, which is part of you, is immortal, so you too can be. It's time you wised up. DNA is just using you as an idiotic robot to create more DNA. And it's the same with all species. As soon as they can fuck and consequently produce more DNA, they start to die. Look at the salmon. It dies immediately after spawning.
Could one paraphrase it then by saying that DNA is a spiral out to screw us?
But it works in billions and billions of years. So a lot of people are going to have to start screaming at it before it change its tune.
Screaming at it?
I mean screaming! I mean saying, I am not going to die! Never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Familiar? Less familiar. Man has created death. W.B. Yeats. And each person's death doesn't just diminish you. It's a direct attack on you. Death is an infectious and insidious larval reaction to negativity that turns you and your life into a soap bubble. You think death is a random stochastic process over which you have no control? Crap! It's a curable disease. The hand of God is at the end of your wrist. All you have to do is change the program, change the station your body is listening to. The universe is an intelligence test. How much do you think you're going to score by dying? When I visited Einstein, shortly before he had his relatives snort his ashes, he's no known grave, that's what happened. He showed me some of his journals in which he had written, "The fear of death is the most unjustified of all fears, for there is no risk of accident to anyone already dead or not yet born." Interesting? This is what I mean. If you tell your body, I am going to die, I am afraid of death, then DNA is going to get the best out of you before you do. It's going to cream the scene before you blow it. But if you say to yourself, I just had a tip-off, death is a rip-off, and we're all going to live forever until our bodies turn to leather, then DNA is going to be forced sooner or later to sign a treaty with you and your body and let you in on some of its secrets.
What secrets?
Well, it's been around for a long time. What do you think the Kundalini is? A double helix. And the caduceus? Mercury's wand with two snakes spiraling around? A double helix. DNA has had its portrait painted by Babylonians, Hindus, Greeks. It's even represented in the layout of Irish burial grounds. The mathematical sign for infinity. The nucleotide template, a double helix. The witches dance, especially when they perform the dark rite of Osiris, which incidentally confers immortality, is almost always an inward turning, double-stranded spiral.
But what sort of secrets have you learned from it?
I'll tell you one. The earth is a living, breathing organism that you mortalists are slowly snuffing, amputating its lungs, injecting unspeakable filth into its bloodstream, invading its digestive system, perverting its precious glandular secretions so that they poison the air. All self-evident, right? You relish hearing that other people have died because that seems to put off the moment of your death. You kill each other out of some pathetic cargo cut fantasy that it'll lengthen your lives, but it doesn't. And then you think, if we kill the entire planet and offer that up as a gigantic sacrificial scapegoat, and with your low-minded mortalist politics you won't be around to suffer the consequences. I don't know. I'm not a specialist in irrationality. Anyway, the secret. DNA got its head together with an ambassador from the plant kingdom, and I mean head, H-E-A-D, hedonic engineering and development. And both of them conspired to get some chemicals into you that would teach you ecological concern. Haven't you noticed that people eating Amanita muscari, magic mushrooms, psilocybins, peyote cacti, and smoking hemp on a massive scale has exactly coincided with the advent of ecological concern? Now there's a tale your biology master never told you.
Well, yes, I suppose that's true. I hope it doesn't get bleeped out. Do you think then that death has no social function?
Some people will do anything to get attention.
Do you think your spiritual immortality do you think your physical immortality casts aspersions on spiritual immortality?
They're the same thing. At the subatomic level, matter is spirit. But even if you still think they're not the same thing, having both has to give you a wider choice.
For a man of 278, you're in remarkably fine physical condition. How have you achieved this?
Analyze, transcend.
Have you ever been ill?
Disease has simply been ill at ease. I connect.
Over the centuries, there's been a lot of documentary evidence to support the theory of reincarnation. And it has even gained a certain respectability in academic circles through the work of the late Dr. Ian Stevenson.
Professor of Psychology at the University of Virginia.
That's right. He's documented over 1,600 cases from people all over the world. Birthmarks corresponding to injuries received in a previous lifetime and so on. So if reincarnation rules okay, then why resist the process?
Reincarnation is fairly chaotic. It's a kind of cosmic pyramid setting. Good fucks lure down good spirits. Bad fucks lure down bad spirits for reincarnation purposes. And most fucks are pretty poetry. Someone comes back from a hateful job thinking, fuck the boss! Fuck everything! Fuck you! What kind of conception is that going to lead to? A lot of low spirits lurking around the basements and cellars of the first astral plane are constantly being attracted by the exchange of stale and vitriolic hormones for their reincarnation. And very few high spirits are being lured down by the exchange of abracadabra organs. How we fuck is who we are. And most people fuck like mindless jackhammers on the blink. They haven't the faintest idea of what they're doing. But the results of what they do is transforming the whole fabric of the planet. Physical immortality allows you to stay permanently with the whole trip without having your life confiscated every 5 minutes and having to scuff around the noosphere and the Thargonosphere looking for two people who are really having it on so that you can squat their fuck and get back into the action.
Life can't exist without death. It's well known.
Oh, come on. Do you think I'm doing you out of life by abolishing death?
Bernard Shaw said there could be no evolution without death.
When did he say that? On his deathbed?
I don't know.
Well, I suspect what he meant by it was that nature needs a deadline to work to in order to change for the better. But don't you think more fruitful changes would come about if it had a lifeline instead? When I saw Shaw in America, he was stuffing hamburgers down his face as fast as they could hand it to him. Couldn't resist the novelty. Died on his return to England. Tom Parr No, I think what you quoted is pretty insipid. He doesn't figure in my commonplace book.
Who does?
There is no death, Longfellow. Death thou shalt die, John Donne. We know this much. Death is an evil. We have the gods' word for it, for they too would die if death were a good thing. Sappho. And what do you expect a dead man to do with his body in the grave, Antoninato? Death is dead, Shelley. Death only dies, Swinburne. There is not room for death, Emily Bronte. So shalt thou feed on death that feeds on men, and death once dead, there's no more dying then. Shakespeare. The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death, St. Paul. There are people who have been exalted to God, and they have remained in that state of exaltation, and they have not died, Paracelsus. King Death has ass's ears, Thomas Lovell Bellows. Man will never be contented until he has conquered death, Dr. Bernard Strehler. Mobilize the scientists, spend the money, hunt out death like an outlaw, Alan Harrington. We should live longer than we do. Death does not seem essential to an organism. We are secreting poisons, but if they are taken away and our bodies kept clean, there is no reason why we should die. Sir Oliver Lodge. The fear of death has been the greatest ally of tyranny, past and present. Sidney Hook. Some people want to achieve immortality through the works of their descendants. I prefer to achieve immortality by not dying. Woody Allen.
I hate quotations. Tell me what you know, Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Immortality from Calvary to chemistry. Death should be wiped out. Immortality is the only cause you can't die for. If you can't take it with you, don't go.
What has been most people's reaction to you?
What would you say it was?
Well, I would say it ranges pretty wide. From people thinking you are complete and utter crank, to them thinking you're some kind of UFO.
Never trust anyone under 100. I pass fairly unnoticed. This planet is my manor. I've never been physically outside it. Frank Drake, professor of astronomy at Cornell, thinks that the secret of longevity can be learned from space aliens who are trying to communicate with us. And he recently wrote in the Technological Review, published by MIT, that he now believes most advanced races in this galaxy have immortality.
I've heard of him. He's no bumbling Mr. Natural.
And neither am I, if that's what you're implying. I'm not pushing some Pollyanna philosophy.
You never get bored.
Evil in the world is my granary. Sometimes my diet's dull. Sometimes there's a lot of starch. I just look for another restaurant. But there's so much to learn. How can you jack it all in and feed your brains to an unappreciative mortician?
Do you seriously believe there's no time? This interview has been going on for some time.
There's no time for time, I told you. I'm not being flippant. You want to look at it scientifically? Okay. Prepare for a minor lesion in the left cerebral hemisphere. The scientific definition of a second is 9,192,631,700 cycles of the energy of the frequency associated with the transition of the two energy levels of the isotope cesium-133. Get it? On the other hand, an Indian culture I ran into in Uttar Pradesh uses the time to boil rice as the smallest basic unit. It's all a tiresome mania.
How did it start?
Clocks started in German monasteries, which were really the first factory. And the first official was the timekeeper. And from him you get the necrophiliac lie that time is money. clocks and capitalism are totally symbiotic. From the walls of the factory to the walls of the coffin, wasting time was simply cheating the timekeeper. Waste time and save yourself. Set your clocks back forever. Freedom runs counterclockwise.
How did clocks start in England?
The first working clock in England was at Hampden Court. It was nicknamed the death clock. Some people are allergic to watches. Did you know that? I'm not talking about those people who wisely stop them running or cannot wear them because of their own strong magnetic field, but about people who actually suffer radiation burns when they wear a watch. And the computer? What's that? An uppity clock? Remember the death knell? That was the only time the church clock could be interrupted. It meant that clocks had no further use for you. Tick, tick, tick. It's death's death count, and digital watches are death's dominoes. Every time you wind your watch, you screw yourself. The faster you go, the slower your watch goes. Einstein's special theory has been proved with atomic watches in manned satellites, the Fitzgerald-Lawrence contraction. The astronauts' watches hardly moved. So keep bopping. Don't let anyone tie you down, and you live longer. When I was in China with Professor Joseph...
Immortality seems to be a name-dropper's paradise.
Look at it in the light of any of your preoccupations. When I was in China with Professor Needham, we visited a generator factory in Nanking. They'd torn down the clocking in board. There was just a rectangular shadow on the wall. People came to work when they felt like it and worked only when they were peaking. A lot more got done.
What are the other advantages of immortality?
It finally makes supermarket stamps worth something.
Well, that's a little whimsical.
Look, biochemistry has made death an offer it can't refuse, and you want to refuse it. Why? You've heard about the Last Supper. Now find out what's for afterwards. Or join the human race and die for a living. They want you dead!
Who do you mean by they?
The necropolitans! The forces of awe and boredom! To know where you are when you're dead. You can't fool them anymore. Can't keep changing your address. It's the ultimate steady job. All they need is a map reference.
Can you tell us what you think of cryogenics? Freezing people. Do you think it'll work?
Freeze, wait, reanimate. Sure it'll work. It worked before. Spores in the ice. It's working in nature now. Cryptobiosis, secret life. There's a small species of brine shrimp, Artemia salina to give you its name in Latin slang, that can insist itself when conditions are negative and then comes back to life when conditions are favourable in 10 minutes or 10 years. There's another called the tardigrade, which normally lives in damp mud. However, if its surroundings become dehydrated, it simply turns off all its life support systems, and to all intents and purposes, it's dead. It can be heated to 150 degrees centigrade, far above the boiling point of water, or frozen to minus 200 degrees. Yet, when it chooses to do so, it can bounce back to life after anything up to 120 years. It can turn off and on almost indefinitely. Ears of corn that were found next to a mummy in the pyramids were planted and sprouted 3,000 years later.
But did anyone try planting a mummy?
We still have pharaohs, don't we? Gettys, Rockefellers, Rothschilds. No, the Egyptians merely embalmed their bodies without much ingenuity. Their prospective resuscitation was an expensive fantasy. But the Chinese were more sophisticated. In the Dao Hong Qing, alchemical gold, that is gold transmuted by cinnabar, was placed in the 13 orifices of the body, and when that was done properly, the body came back to life after exhumation. Chinese pharaohs were successfully planted.
What is cinema?
It's red mercuric sulfide, which is made in the body chiefly by the distillation of sperm.
And what about women?
I believe fellatio has a certain popularity. Nicholas and Fernel Flamel lived on the tantric exchanges of each other's bodily fluids transmitted through nameless wildness for 120 years each. The alchemical furnace you should use to prepare the elixir is your own body. The Taoist immortalist hangs himself upside down like a bat in order to allow the essence of a sperm to flow to his brain. And the famous fields of cinnabar in alchemical literature, the Tantien, are to be found in the innermost recesses of the brain and the intestines. And it is there the embryo of immortality is alchemically prepared. Jesus gave you the product. Now we give you the formula.
So there are more recipes for immortality than eating your own shit.
Oh, sure. Try an apricot kernel, for example. The pectin turns transmuted sperm to apricot jam. Delicious. That'll see you through to 130. And keep an eye out for the Immortalist cookbook, which a colleague of mine is working on. And here's another. In Indian alchemy, mercury is known as the sperm of Shiva and called Narabaya. And in the Sarvana Tantra, you can learn how by eating killed or fixed mercury called Nasta Pista, you may become immortal.
How do you fix mercury?
Let me quote you from the Rasanava. When quicksilver is killed with an equal weight of purified sulfur, it becomes 100 times more efficacious. When it is killed with twice its weight of sulfur, it cures leprosy. When it is killed with thrice its weight of sulfur, it cures mental languor. When it is killed with 4 times its weight of sulfur, it removes grey hair and wrinkles. And when it is killed with 5 times its weight of sulfur, it becomes a panacea for all the ills that flesh is heir to. Dead men of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your lids.
Still sounds cranky to me.
Knees are knocking in mortuaries all over the world. The market value of death is going down all the time. Latest figure 6 feet. There's so much to learn. Why do you pretend to have been stillborn by dying? Death is a grave mistake. Listen. If 100 years ago, when people were dying around 30, you had said, in 100 years' time, everyone will live to be 70, people would have said you were gaga, right?
Right.
Look at it now, though. The way life expectancy is progressing even on a banal medical level. Within 30 years, there's going to be an exponential leap in life expectancy to hundreds of years. Excuse me. For instance, if you're in your 20s now, you expect to die around 2066. Add 30 years bonus to that, and you expect to die around 2100. And how long will science be able to give you then? Even assuming those researchers currently talking in terms of life expectancy of hundreds of years are doing so too soon, in 2100, an increase of 100 years will be a conservative estimate. So that will see you through to 2200. And where will the life extension sciences be then?
I presume you count yourself. among these researchers you mentioned.
I do. Would you like to know who they all are?
Yes.
Well, there's Dr. Johann Bornstein, who in 1973 spoke of extending the human lifespan to 140 years. Now he's constantly talking in terms of 800 years. Then there's Paul Segal at the University of California at Berkeley, who has experimentally stopped the aging process in laboratory animals. And he believes his work will extend the human lifespan to between 400 and 500 years. Dr. Robert Federer puts the figure even higher. He says we should begin aiming to extend the human lifespan to 1,000 years. How does that grab you?
Well, I suppose they can't all be bananas.
No, that sucks. The Russians are injecting dehydrated placentas into people desirous of longevity, and they believe that this will extend the human lifespan almost indefinitely. But anything that can be done chemically can be done by other means as well.
What do you mean?
I mean that you're constantly stimulating a different chemical mandala in your body no matter what you do. Even if you do nothing, there's a chemistry of nothing. There's also a chemistry of self-knowledge. Self-knowledge stimulates a large range of neuropeptides.
I can understand pain or anxiety or very strong emotions such as anger stimulating chemical activity. Pain, I believe, stimulates endomorphines in the body, morphine derivatives.
Right.
But compared to pain, self-knowledge is pretty abstract.
Are you sure you've tried it? Your brain cells are dying off hundreds every second, yet they have the same chemical ability to repair themselves as other cells in your body which do so. If you obey alien orders, particularly for money, your brain cells die like scurf. You're not using your brain, you're railroading it. Know thyself neuropeptides, to put it slightly glibly, will redeem the self-repair trigger in the neurons and glia that have atrophied. Take your choice. Cats know themselves. Animals very rarely do. Even in an animal that has starved or been starved to death, its brain is the last organ to go. But you mortalist brains are dying all the time. Even in an Olympic athlete, at the peak of physical condition, his brain is already dead. Why? Because he doesn't know what he's doing or why. It's time you gave death the cold shoulder or squeezed the life out of it. Look at Shakespeare. He was a touch before my time.
Just a touch.
About the width of a cigarette paper. Look at the sonnets, written when he was aged about 30 and completely obsessed with death, decay and senility. Why? Because it was happening to him aged 30 and he went downhill from then on. Ridiculous.
Do you think Jesus Christ conquered death?
Yes and no. He survived clinical death for a very brief period, but having done so, he didn't have much juice left over to do anything else. Why? Well, in his lifetime, he had blown several fuses by cursing fig trees, sending pigs to their death, and giving people graven advice such as, "Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's." Look what he did after the resurrection. Wobbled around like a wraith for a couple of weeks and then floated away. He was completely unrecognizable to his friends and he hardly had enough energy left to say goodbye to them. He died.
Are you ever tempted to think that you're God?
I'm just in the kindergarten of the Immortalist movement. The universe is the Messiah.
There's a graffiti I've seen written up from time to time. Death is nature's way of telling you to slow down. How does that grab you?
If it makes you laugh, it's true.
It didn't make you laugh.
No. I think it's rather sad. If you don't do what you want to do, you die. What could be simpler? That's the thought behind it. Death is just DNA getting fed up of you. Your nervous system is a robot operated by a genetic pilot called DNA. But you mortalists are afraid to look at the pilot, exactly as you behave on aeroplanes. You never look at the pilot. If you did, it might undermine your confidence.
So death is a kind of DNA hijack, a DNA pooch.
It's your body's immunity system jacking it in. Why? Because your antibodies have finally picked up the message from a hostile world. Give up. Pack it in. What's the point? Don't move. Surrender.
I get the feeling that you're a little bit patronizing about cryogenics, freezing people. Is that true?
It's perfectly possible. But why spend your life in a fridge lumbering people with your electricity bill?
When you say it's true, do you think it'll work?
Oh, it'll work. The thing is going to work. Ellinger froze sperm in 1963 and revived it.
Get them by the balls and their hearts and minds will follow.
From now on, it's just a question of scale. Head transplants, which I believe to prefer to call body transplants, the whole shtick. But it's just a case of shutting the stable door after the horse is bolted. And who is going to be frozen? Who is going to be revived? The kind of money that needs to be conned for research is going to ensure that the nation will be run by immortal Rockefellers, Rothschilds and Gates. And then let's say people are smashed up in car accidents and have to be frozen in bits and pieces. Who gets transplanted to who? What bit to what bit? Dr. Frankenstein would come in his grave. I find it all rather funny. Poor old Walt Disney in the Snow Queen's palace in Disneyland. There's a room there which tourists aren't allowed into, with hoarfrost leaking under the door. And that's where he is, a giant ice cream. And apparently before he shacked up in this frozen fairyland, he made a whole series of films for Disney employees. They're shown to the staff each month. It's just old Walt rapping, telling them not to draw genitals on any of his characters, and to keep upholding the great American virtues. And he always ends up waving at them and saying with an icy glint in his eye, "I'll be seeing you."
But won't a world filled with people who have lived as long as you have multiply the world's problems by some enormous proportion?
Am I a problem to you? Problems are just DOR!
DOR?
Deadly orgone radiation. People with problems are acting as witting or unwitting receptors for DOR.
Why?
Because they're dying! And therefore attracting negative energy. Look at cancer, another fine growth industry. There's a huge collaboration between all these so-called sufferers. But let me tell you, a problem shared is a problem doubled. They're all pooling their bad news into a huge, throbbing, palpitating sump in order to give the whole planet electric shock therapy. Why? Because they think there's something wrong with it.
There's an old Arab saying, if you rescue a man from drowning, you have to look after him for the rest of your life. Would that summarize your attitude? Which I must say I find pretty indifferent.
If you like. But what's this Arab doing drowning in the desert? Look. I'm from aristocrats' live.
I've gathered that.
Stay hungry. Stay foolish. You want want me to spend my entire life in dog shit because of what constitutes your demented ideas of a social conscience? People foul up because they stay in the same place. They've traded utopia for reality. They've traded their instinct for politics. Consuming is a substitute for being. There's a woman, Deva Mehta, in Rajasthan. She hasn't eaten or drunk for 50 years. She lives off sunlight, condensation, and the salts in the air. You have radio as a substitute for telepathy. Television is a substitute for astral projection. Aeroplanes are a substitute for levitation. Smoking is a substitute for inner fire. Reproduction is a substitute for immortality.
I might take you up on that one.
Can you reach that high? One of the purposes of lovemaking, not that you can make love is to achieve immortality. When it fails, you get conception. And what else is wrong with you mortalists? You consume instead of feel. You have God instead of aeon juice.
What is that?
Go with the glow and renew the glue and you'll find out. Mobility is the most revolutionary tactic there is. And what is more revolutionary than the conquest of death? What is more revolutionary? Marxist, Leninist misery? Please, dear government, we'd like, with your permission, to negotiate an even higher rate of exploitation for this wonderful opportunity you're giving us to shorten our lives. I knew that impenetrable little punter Karl Marx when he lived on Dean Street in London. Spent all his spare change on stockbrokers. A little known fact. Bakunin, he spent most of his time ingratiating himself with white Russians. And Proudhon, property is theft. I bet you €1 million to a toffee apple he couldn't have stolen a packet of sauerkraut out of Lidl. What is more revolutionary than the conquest of death?
And what about yourself? Apart from appearing on programs like this, what reason do you have for living?
Life is merely an accumulation of all the forces that resist death. It's my desire to make myself a larger part of that process. There are 1,000,000,000 billion stars for every living thing. Feast on their auras and have yourself a fling.
Very poetically put. With such a unique perspective on the past, on the history of mankind. One wonders why you did not interfere in some of its major disasters. World War I and II, for example. What did you do in the war, Daddy?
The word war comes from the word "ver" in the Anglo-Saxon, which simply means confusion. How could I have been involved? I believe in order, true order, which is a dance. How could I have been involved? It's hard to teach anyone by example, let alone lemmings. Do you know what Bertolt Brecht told me? That all the Jews in Amsterdam were rounded up by letter. By letter. Imagine. I wrote a little poem on the 70th anniversary of the outbreak of World War II, which amused me a little. Would you like to hear it?
Certainly.
After the success of the 1418 European Folk Festival, the sponsors spent over 20 years preparing for a global version. When they held the 39-45 Folk Fest, a lot of people came and a lot of people went. There was Adolf Church and the Boer Constrictors, Hyacinth Hitler and the Hog Dodgers, and many more supporting and suppurating bands, notably the Bismarck Boasters and the Soul Spills. The music was many percussive and full of animosity. The words in most of the songs, well comprehensible, seemed to refer to some rift in the prevailing Judeo-Christian subculture. The PA was poor, and in Japan it completely broke down, which caused brain damage in heads as yet unspawned. And many people were forced to grok on the music in overcrowded compounds long after they wanted to split. The lead singers were very popular, and some of the groupies saw to it that Hollywood immortalized them in celluloid coffins. 2 or 3 of them completely burned themselves out and died on stage. The backup singers and groups got wasted and flaked out under piles of cement crosses near the main venues, presumably waiting until the music picked up again. And many members of the audience had their blood spiked with lead and a host of alien substances. There have been many attempts to get the show on the road again, but even the heaviest backers have now backed out, feeling that if they held it today, many people might leave halfway, and the Third World War has been postponed indefinitely through lack of support.
Is this interview at an end?
It's only beginning.
Do you have a last word?
I leave it with JBS Haldane. The universe is not only queerer than we think, it's queerer than we can think. So don't stop to think. Keep streaming. There are people alive now who are never going to die. Put that on the news.